Let's just have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this opportunity that we have to think and talk about some of the issues that concern our community. We thank you, God, for every person here present, and we pray that you guide our discussion, and that your name will be glorified in everything that we say and do. In Jesus' name we ask, amen. Let me, before I introduce myself, some of you know me, some don't, but for many years I used to work at THU in the multicultural department, 10 years. First I was the bureau director, then I made this bureau to a department. Major Wiltshire came as head of department. I became the African Heritage Consultant. And when I was in that department, I felt, the first time I came to teach, I asked, do you guys have statistics like how many blacks, Hispanics? Oh no, it's the Salvation Army, we just one army. I said, no, it's important to have statistics. So we did the first one, and I found out that there were only 5.5% African American officers in the Eastern Territory. In the South, I think it was 2% something, in the West, you know, so, and I said, we need to do something to recruit more African American, and that's how we started these conferences. It used to be a recruitment conference for African American. The first one was in 1993. That was in Connecticut. What's the camp again in Connecticut? The camps, youth camp in Connecticut. Wonderland, yeah.
No, that's in Massachusetts.
Connery camp, yeah. We had about 60 officers and local officers who came for the first time, and then we did ask if we can have that every 2 years. Now we call it empowerment, but the whole issue was to invite college students, black college students, and soldiers to come and encourage them to consider going to training. There has been an improvement. I asked the secretary in that office to send me some statistics for now, but she was so busy I didn't get that. But there's been an improvement. We're up to about almost 10%. Of course, and we have a lot of African American now in training school. So it's good to have more join the Salvation Army because it's a great ministry. And so that's what I did. When I was in that office, I also came up with the project. I don't know if you read the book, Salvationists of African Descent in the United States. They usually bring copies of that book that is there. But I read the story of Jeremy. He was actually the first Salvationist who brought the Salvation Army in the United States. This was back in, what is that, in Ohio. Oh my memory, I'm getting old, you can see my gray hair. But Jeremy came from England, he went to Canada, and he went to Ohio and started the first meeting of the Salvation Army. I was so fascinated that I said we had to write the history of African American because they made so much contribution. And I compiled a lot of research from the West, Eastern Territory, put that together, and we asked Warren May, who was in the military, was a better writer than me. I said, why don't you write a book? And that's how we came up with that book. So we did quite a lot of things to make sure, that you attract more African Americans to Salvation Army. Now, I was asked to speak about it takes family, it takes a village to build the family, but let me just change that. But because, and we were supposed to speak about parenting, we just changed that a little bit because my wife cannot make it. We have a big event, the Harvest Festival. It's a Caribbean kind of Thanksgiving celebration that all the church, the core of the city, in New York City, celebrate. And so we have to go, in fact, after this session, we have to go back to New York because we're expecting a lot of people to come and join us. So I say, let me change a little bit the subject. And the concept of it takes a family, a village to raise a child, of course, from Mrs. Clinton, she got it from, it simply means, maybe I give you some example. If you when I was growing up, okay, in my street, my neighborhood, if I misbehave, I did something bad, actually my neighbor can slap me and punish me, and my mother comes and says, I'm glad you tried to discipline my son. Or we cannot do it here. But that's actually, so the children are the responsibility of everyone in the community. There are families, if they have a smart young man, they want to send them to France to get educated. The whole group, the whole family, the whole extended family, uncle, cousin, everybody put money to buy them ticket to go and study. So that's the concept that we want to share with you, this concept of solidarity, of doing something to help one another. And immigrants have been very successful at doing that. I was just sharing in the first session, I was a social worker for the Jamaica Civil Corps for 7 years in Queens. And there was an issue between the Koreans and the African American. African Americans said that the banks are giving money to the Koreans to buy houses, to build businesses, but the blacks are not getting the money. So we went to this community meeting to try to reconcile our issues. And it was interesting. One of the Korean leaders stood up. He said, you know what we do? A lot of us are illegal. We can even open an account in the bank. Banks are not helping us. What we do something, I think the Chinese call that sushi. Okay? We had like 100 people. We come together, everybody give $1,000 a month. Okay? The first time we get all that money, 100,000, we give that to John. You can start a business. Next month, we go around and we help each other. But a lot of us African Americans just, we thought banking. Okay, so that's what we call solidarity. A lot of immigrants, when they come, they get together, that's how they survive. We have a lot of Mexican in our core area. And I was wondering how they're buying homes. I mean, Westchester is the most expensive county in the United States. And they don't know what we do. We have 3 families, buy a house with 3 bedrooms, and every family live, the parents and children live in that one room. The next time, they buy another house, and 2 families move, okay? And that's how these people, a lot of immigrants survive. But we can use that concept as African American to build a village, even in our community, where we can, this is my family. This is a recent picture that was taken when my son got married right in the middle. And that's my wife. I went to this conference, they thought that she was my daughter, so I said, maybe I should be dyeing my hair. But that's my wife, and then John, my daughter, Danielle, that's my daughter, that's John, this one, that's Michael, got married, my wife, and they got a big smile. They usually don't smile, but maybe a street smile, that's me, and that's my youngest son. So this whole notion of it takes a village, this is a beautiful picture of African kids, just to make that a circle, that represent unity, solidarity. And what we really want to teach, we're going to speak about some issues that blacks are going through, and then at the end find out what can we do to build these solidarity groups in our neighborhood. It can be an extended family, it can be close friends, it can be a fraternity. My son can go to any city because he belongs to the black fraternity. They will find him a place to stay. If he needs a job, they have doctors, lawyers, they connect those kids to get jobs. So even in the big cities, we can create those groups. We're responsible people to help one another. We cannot count on the government all the time. But, and you see what I'm saying like that. So I want to let my son introduce himself, and then he can start, and then at the end, we're going to have some discussion. All right?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So my name is John Diakanwa. I am a recent college graduate at Dartmouth College where I studied sociology. So a lot of these different issues on inequality, race, politics, feminism coalesce under the idea of sociology, which I spent most of my time studying in college. While I was there, I was also heavily involved in activism, civil activism. I was the president of the NAACP chapter there, which is an organization that is mostly committed to the uplift of the African American community and to the support of the African American community. So the kind of things we would do there, things similar to this. We would hold discussion events. We would hold community meetings where we would all come together and discuss different problems we were facing that were specific to us on that campus, but also specific to our greater community in the world. So we see something happening on the news, we would come back as a community and organize a discussion. We would also hold marches and rallies for different problems and things that we were facing. As my dad mentioned, I was also a member of a historically African American fraternity. And the main purpose of that organization was for the uplift of young black males, giving them the type of role models, because we were all older by the time we joined the fraternity, giving the younger males, the freshmen, the sophomore, the type of role models they might need in order to progress through and navigate a top institution, a college. So that's a lot of what I did in college, and these types of issues that deal with the black community are something that I'm very passionate about and spend a lot of time thinking about, reading about, talking about, which is why my dad invited me to come down. So what we just spoke about was this idea of solidarity, how working together, being in a community and being with one another is about supporting one another and about being there for each other. Much as the examples that my father mentioned earlier illustrate how these different immigrant communities support one another and how they are there for one another. And what I wanted to talk about was community. And to me, when I see solidarity, community is the structure through which solidarity is practiced. So you have this idea of being there for one another. Community is where you practice this idea. Community is that neighborhood of people who share similar beliefs, have a similar background, have similar attributes, visions, and goals to you. Go about practicing this idea of solidarity. Go about being there for one another. You have these small pockets of communities. That could be your neighborhood. That could be your fraternity. That could be your church. It should be your church. Your different communities. And while you have these different small pockets of communities, like these small neighborhoods, you have these churches, you have these smaller African American communities, we also have the larger African American community within our country. All of these small different neighborhoods and communities all coalesce into one greater community called the African American community in our country. And that is something that we are subscribed to as members of it based solely on the fact that we all face very similar things, whether we want to face them or not. These are problems that we'll face whether we want to admit that we go through them or not. When you're discriminated against, it's not necessarily because of a belief you have, but it's because of the way you look. And this whole idea is what builds our community. So we want to talk about community, and we want to talk about how solidarity works through our community. But in order to really get to the root of community and to get to understanding the community and understanding how it works through solidarity, we need to look at our community, the greater African American community, and try to understand, the state it is, the health of our community. So in talking about our community, there are definitely a lot of very good examples of positive communities, positive black communities that are thriving and doing very well. I was blessed enough to be able to go to school and live in one for 8 years in New Rochelle, New York, which is a pretty strong black community in which, you know, people support one another. You see parents sending their kids to college. You see kids getting different jobs and adults working at different places. Black doctors, black lawyers. A thriving black community in which people support one another and uplift each other and don't face a lot of the different problems that, you know, you may see. Another good example of a positive, strong black community that we can learn from is in Prentice County in Maryland. That is statistically shown to be the wealthiest black community in the country. Prentice County, Georgia. Prentice County.
Excuse me. You talk about Prince George's County?
Yeah, Prince George's County.
I lived there.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah, so you're from
I live in
Prince
Laurel,
George's
Maryland.
County.
It's in Prince George's County.
I visited Prince George's County recently, about 2 weeks ago. A friend who lives in DC, we went out to a game and then we drove around. And driving around that neighborhood, I was like, so all of these major houses, these mansions, these big houses are owned by black people? And he was like, yes. You know, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but these houses, these communities are filled with, you know, black lawyers, black doctors, black government officials who all, you know, live together in a community and acknowledge their race, acknowledge their unity, acknowledge their community, support one another, and thrive. They're thriving. They're doing very well. One of, you know, and so we have these small pockets of communities that are doing very well, these African American communities that are doing well. However, it's an unfortunate reality that these pockets and these small communities, these individual communities, aren't necessarily representative of the greater community in our country. So when we think about the black community, when we often see the black community portrayed on the media, portrayed in the news, and even spoken about in general, we often hear about a lot of the negatives, and that comes from a lot of these statistics that show that, you know, on a social level, on a socioeconomic level, a lot of the indicators that show that a community is doing well or poorly show that the African American community on a national level isn't doing as well as the average American community. Meaning things like their levels of educational attainment, their social economic status, their health, and a lot of these things there's a gap between our national average and what the average African American community experiences. So just so we don't have, you know, me talking for 2 hours and we have a little bit of crowd interaction, what are some problems or some issues within the greater black community that you guys think are relevant to talk about, or just anything that comes to mind when you think of problems or issues or things facing the black community?
Poor quality education.
Did you say what was it?
Poor quality education.
Poor quality education, that's one. Just call out.
Single-parent homes.
Crime, single-parent homes.
Or no parent.
Or no parent homes.
Because our parents just jobs.
What about jobs?
There's none.
There you go. No jobs. Anything else? What else can we think of?
Different ethnicity, black ethnicities that cannot or don't want to relate to each other.
Ah, okay, so disunity among different ethnic groups. That's definitely a problem. So I listed out a couple that I think are relevant. Sorry. So one of the first ones that I thought when I was thinking of issues that the black community are facing is social mobility. And social mobility is the ability for one class of people to move up into different classes. So that means a working class group of people to move into a middle class family, or middle class to move up to upper class. That ability to achieve this American dream of coming here dirt poor and moving up is statistically shown to be harder for African American families than for other ethnic groups in this country. So that is a major issue we face. Income and wealth inequality. So you have income inequality, which is the national average being at one level of income for the average household, and for African American households, that number being lower, significantly lower than the national average. And that income gap is a problem, but an even bigger problem related to that is the wealth gap, which is even bigger than the income gap. So when we think about income, income is the actual amount of money that your household brings in through the major, your main sources of income, your main jobs. And wealth is the accumulation of all of your property, all of your debt, and all of the things that you own. So when you look at income, it'll be like, you know, whatever we just brought in. When you look at wealth, it's the value of your house, it's the value of your car, it's all of your student loans, it's all of your debt, it's all of your bank loans factored into one number. And when we look at that and compare the average of the African American community to the greater overall American community, it's significantly lower, even worse than the income gap. So there are some areas like, you know, Prince George's County or New Rochelle where the income may be similar, but when you factor in all the debt and you factor in all the student loans and you factor in all the things that these African American families use to get to where they are, it's a lower number. And the wealth gap is a huge issue. Education, something that we said earlier, is definitely another issue. In terms of higher education achievement rates, like the rates at which African Americans graduate college, the rates at which they get master's degrees, rates at which they get PhDs, is significantly lower than the national average. You also have health disparities. Health disparities is something I only started learning about recently, in that there's a significant gap and difference in the physical health and the actual health of people living in these communities compared to the national average. One of the statistics that I saw was that showed that there's literally a different life expectancy for African Americans in certain communities than the national average. If you go to DC, you go into one area code where you know, all the senators live, the president lives, and the life expectancy is just what you would expect it to be, 85 years old. And you move over one area code to another neighborhood and it drops 10 years. You know, a literal difference in the livelihood and the lifespan of a community of people. So that's another issue that's connected to a lot of other things that we'll
Can I
speak
ask a
on.
question about that?
Oh, go ahead.
When you're referring to that life expectancy, are contributing factors to the statistic crime, or is it because of the fact that, are you saying that our health care?
Healthcare. Healthcare is a major reason why this life expectancy changes. Crime and a lot of other things factor in, but the biggest issue with the health disparities has to do with access to healthcare. Things like being able to afford different healthcare plans, being able to, you know, go out and shop at a clean vegetable grocery store, seeing grocery stores in your neighborhood, and as opposed to only like fried chicken or Burger King sponsored fast food stores. You know, these are things that factor into a community's health.
It's also been proven though that we as African Americans get a different health care given to us. So when you go into a doctor, it's proven that if you have a white person that comes in with the same symptoms, same age, same everything, same address, you give them the same exact information, you're going to be treated differently. That white person's going to get a better quality of care than an African American.
Better diagnosis.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you're going to have more tests run, you're going to walk out of there with probably a better diagnosis of what's going on versus an African American, unfortunately.
Definitely. These are realities. These aren't, you know, opinions. These are actual things that can be statistically measured.
They did a 2020 presentation on it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they did both male and female, African American, both male, female, Caucasian, and literally women, same age, everything. It was like shown, so you can't argue that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Other issues. I think the biggest talking point and thing that most, you know, of our community speak on and know about is mass incarceration. That's this idea of filling our prison cells with a disproportionately high amount of African Americans, usually African American males, to the average, the national average, or Caucasian males. And we'll show statistics a little bit later on, but one of the most startling ones is that, you know, at the rate we're going of incarcerating African American males, 1 in every 3 African American males will spend some time in prison, which
and it
is...
starts when they're juveniles, not even when they're grown men, like our young people.
Definitely. So, you know, this whole system of mass incarceration is a huge issue. Drugs is an issue, but not necessarily how we think of it. It's not necessarily the use, sale, and abuse of drugs that is the issue, but the treatment of those and the viewpoint of how we look at the problem of drugs in these communities. There's drugs in all communities. You know, white people use drugs, black people use drugs, college kids use drugs, everyone uses drugs. But for some reason, African Americans are being incarcerated at higher rates for the same usage of drugs than their counterparts. So that is a major, go for it.
Because it's a foreign drug situation, like, it's more Caucasian people that use a lot more drugs than it is black. Black people actually are the ones that's patients of anything, any pill that they could get their mind when they buy anything. They're just known on the high tip. And the real reason why I say that is because I lived in Maine for 7 years. And not Portland, Maine. In Portland, Maine, I went way up to like Waterville, Maine, Bangor, Maine, and I seen seriously for myself that if you could come up and say I had to go to the hospital and I had a real bad headache, the doctor gave me something. Oh, what pills you got? At the door is what pills you got, what do you use, how much you want to sell them for. I swap this out for this. I go buy you it. And I seen, they say we don't treat our own the same, but they treat their own worse than we treat our own. Over a drug.
There's huge
disparities. The kids high on drugs.
Yeah. There are very huge disparities in the usage of drugs. And
So our African Americans get busted on selling drugs at a higher rate because we sell on the street corner, we sell in front of the stores, we're out in the community selling drugs. White people, when they sell drugs, it is mostly out of their house. So you have more eyes on you when you're out in the street. So unfortunately, we do it in a stupid way. They do it in their home where you go into their homes and you're sitting down.
that's
The majority, it's a proven fact. It's proven. I'm not saying everybody. I don't want to argue, but that's why we got busted. We have more people on our streets.
No, that's the dumb ones that want to go out there and sell on the corners because they listen to these rappers that say.
Right. But I'm saying that's why.
So I think what you're both saying definitely are both very valid, and I think you know that is valid. You know, the visibility of the sale of drugs that factors into the higher rates. But something that we're going to get into a little bit later on is this presumption of criminality that law enforcement has on African American males. That is one of the biggest factors. Yeah, it's not just the fact that they can see them, it's that they're being targeted. It's that they're in these communities.
And the fact of the matter is there are no African Americans at the top of the distribution chain of drugs.
No. You're also correct.
You know, so drug usage is a major issue. Another issue that we're going to touch on is self-hate. And that's an issue that, you know, is within a lot of communities oppressed under systems of oppression, and you know, you can see it taking place in different forms. It's anything from, you know, black people saying, oh, I don't date other black people, to you know, this need to, you know, move away from other blacks and just like disapprove of your own race. You know, we're seeing a lot of movements to counteract that. Things like the natural hair movement counteract this. Things like, you know, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, to try to counteract that idea of self-hate and that idea of inferiority. But that is something that is plaguing our community that we'll look at as well. And police brutality is something that I don't think anyone is unfamiliar with at the rate at which this information is being spread. You know, we see it every week, we see it every month. There's a different case every day sometimes too. On your Facebook feeds, on your Twitters, on your news feeds, you're always seeing different cases of police brutality and how it affects African Americans at higher rates than others. So, just to kind of cover what we just spoke on, we're looking at solidarity within the black community, and we're looking at the different issues that the black community is facing. And to really get into how we can practice this solidarity, we need to look at, you know, these problems and try and find a solution. But what I really want to stress for us is that we need to figure out a way to constructively look at this problem and not just come up with random solutions, random like reasons for why these problems are happening. Often, if you were to go around and ask people, oh, why do we face these problems? Why are blacks doing as well in this country? You'll hear just solutions, the easiest solution that can pop into your head. Oh, black kids started pulling up their pants and we can get arrested at high rates. Oh, the white man is just simply out to get us, and that's it out of that. Or, oh, we're just inferior. You know, what I want to really work around is trying to reframe how we look at this problem so that we can better analyze it and get to better solutions. So, the best way to look at a lot of these problems, and it's not necessarily, you know, the only way to look at it, but one of the best ways to look at these individual statistics that we see, these rates that we see, is within the context of history. What's happening today isn't an isolated event that has nothing to do with what happened in the past. It is all connected.
Yeah.
And that's something that we want to work out today. This idea that what happened when at the start of this country, at the grounding of this country, when we laid our framework to make this country, is still affecting us today, and how it's affecting us today, so that we can start talking about this African American community in constructive ways and look at better solutions. So, we're going to start with, and this is going to be a bit of a history lesson, but some of it shouldn't be news to a lot of you, and we'll have a lot of interaction. Feel free to speak out if you have a question, comment, or something that pertains to what we're currently speaking about. But, you know, anybody who's gone to, or who's like sat through Black History Month or watched a civil rights movement knows some, not all, of what happened in this country. And the place you always start is slavery. You know, African American, it's no secret that African Americans were brought to this country as forced labor. And to feed an economic system that was built off of the backs of African American slaves. And that is in the very groundwork of our Constitution, in the groundwork of our country. There are references to slavery even in our Constitution, and that's where we started. That's why African Americans have been brought here. And we do know that in 1865, we fought a civil war, and you know, for many reasons, slavery was officially ended by the 13th Amendment, abolished by the 13th Amendment in its overt form. And that ended the most overt form of slavery that we experienced, but not necessarily slavery as a whole. Moving past that, within the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, there's a major loophole that states that you are no one is allowed to own people and use them for forced labor unless they're under a criminal system, or unless they're under the system of criminality that our country began to exploit. So that was a loophole that our country used and exploited. And as we're going to see as we talk through all of this, throughout our history, in order to continue to suppress African Americans. So right after the 13th Amendment was passed, we experienced this period of convict leasing in which African Americans were arrested in droves just for petty crimes, and reintroduced into the system of slavery through convict leasing. And they used that 13th Amendment loophole to reenact slavery, basically. And that's something that, you know, maybe slavery ended in 1865, but continued for years after. Following that, there was also Jim Crow, in which specific laws within our government were used to discriminate against African Americans. So much that 100 years after slavery ended, African Americans still couldn't vote. So we look at the history of our country, it's about 240 years old. For a good half of it, we weren't, even much more than half of it, maybe even 3/4 of it, we weren't even able to vote. You know, so when we think about slavery and when we think about these issues, we need to broaden our context to see that it's a lot longer than just that. I'll get to you in a second. Following that, the next section of early discrimination that we all come to think about when we, you know, speak of the history of African Americans in this country, is this period of Jim Crow and segregation, which went between things like, you know, unequal facilities, separate but equal, and laws that basically separated African Americans from their white counterparts in the social setting, and basically limited the resources that this country has for African Americans. And that went up until 1965, the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Movement, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, and a lot of this overt racism was ended, but rather shifted and manipulated into something else. And that comprises of a lot of the early discrimination that, you know, is within our historical context. Two of the major things that came out of this period of early discrimination in our country is this presumption of criminality, this idea in the subconscious of the American mind that African Americans are inherently criminal. And this idea came into reality in order to continue to enslave them, in order to continue to benefit off the work and the labor of African Americans. So this was embedded through things like the media, through movies that were in place, through articles, things that were written, the way we spoke to each other. You know, it was just there. The second thing is this presumption.
How do you rationalize that presumption of criminality?
What do you mean rationalize?
How did that even become?
Well, it was beneficial economically.
So you're saying it was a fabricated presumption?
Yes, it was a fabricated presumption that was used to economically enrich those that could benefit off the labor of African Americans. So, let's say I own a plantation and slavery just ended. How am I going to find workers, cheap labor, to fulfill this plantation? Well, the prison system, the convict leasing system will allow for that cheap labor to come in, so now you don't have to pay employees. And now, you know, if we work to create a society in which we assume that African Americans are already prone to criminality, already prone to committing these crimes, to thefts, to things like that, then it'll, you know, benefit this economic system. The second major thing that was embedded into the American subconscious is this presumption of inferiority. And that's been there for a while. That's the roots of racism. That's this idea that there's something inherently unequal about having black skin. And this is basically used to justify this overt form of racism. This idea that the spread in our country has been used to justify. It's been used to ease the conscience of people that, you know, feel bad about seeing the enslavement or the unequal treatment of African Americans. So I'll stop now for questions.
When you were using the term African American, there was a time when they didn't consider the descendants of slaves American. When I was teaching, I noticed that they started changing some of the books to include slavery, and they started using the term African American, you know, to describe, you know, I had to refute that. I said they weren't called Americans, they were Africans of, you know, African descent, they were slaves. They did not want them to even be a part of their landscape of, you know, their culture. So when you say that, that was a new concept of calling the African American, you know, the slaves, the descendants of slaves, African Americans. Because even up to just about the Civil Rights Act, they still didn't even want to think of, you know, the garbage men as men, as, you know, colored men or whatever. We had to really almost fight again to get the term that we are African Americans, because we are, you know, saluting the flag. So then what do you call the Africans who come here, who become citizens? You know, and there are two distinct groups, you know, that are not really trying to merge or whatever. They stay separate. So the term African American in the colleges and in some of the high school is very loosely defined.
The semantics that we've used to describe our state in this country has changed back and forth. Like there was a time where, you know, the official term you used Negro, another time where it was right to say black American, and it was another time where, you know, there's all these shifts. But I definitely think it's really important to realize that, you know, they didn't have access to the full rights of citizenship, so how could you call them Americans? That's definitely true and definitely valid.
Well, when the Constitution was written, they weren't even considered people, were they? They were considered property.
3/5 of a person.
Right.
But that's still going on, because if you have a child, your child is not yours. It's the state that you live in is child. Okay, no, I'm just saying in general. If you have a child, say you have a baby. Okay. You got a baby.
Right.
This white person have a baby. This white person baby belongs to them. Why? Because they pay every bill. They paid all their bills. You had a baby, your child is not yours. It belongs to the state that you live in. In order to get your child, that's where they get that. That's where DCF come into involved if you do anything wrong. That's where the government still got a hold on you.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of what she's saying is valid in terms of applying it to, economic.
A lot of people don't know that, and the only reason why I know that, my aunt worked for DCF for like 10 years. And they have a thick book that they need to go through, real thorough, real efficient. But the question was, where was y'all at in the years? Y'all just popped up out of nowhere, and y'all telling people what to do, what to say, how to do it. And these kids nowadays, you can think you talk to your parent any kind of way, but they get that from their friends if they go to the white schools. These white kids talk to their parents like they a little piece of trash on the floor, and they accept that. And that parent, oh no.
Yeah, so there's a lot of research on how local governments can enact ownership over African Americans in different ways. I think in a sense she definitely is right in that the government can take away your child if you don't meet certain criteria that often are harder for economically disadvantaged groups.
But they take away children from Caucasian parents as well. I don't think that we have a monopoly.
No, it's
they do on the black community.
That's definitely true. But the discrepancy comes in when you start to add the economic portion. Like when you start to look at who has the resources to own their child and who doesn't. And even that is problematic in that why do I need a certain amount of money to have a child? Like why do I need, why do I need to meet criteria to have a child? Why do I need to reach this bar that you created to have a child? So what you're saying definitely has a lot of validity. Any other thoughts on, early discrimination and this creation of this idea that, African Americans are criminals and inferior?
Yeah, and also, when we grew up, that was instilled in us.
Yeah.
So if somebody was darker than you, they divided us according to color. So I'm not black like you, and so there's that thing about being inferior again. You just had to be over and above somebody. Yeah, even within families, there's that self-hate. And they just fed that to us, and that's how we grew up. I'm over 60 years old. So when I grew up, that was a big thing in our community, that you were darker than me. And so you were different than me, I'm better than you. Big thing. And which kept us divided. And so as I got older, I began to see the younger women now coming out. They love each other. We weren't taught like that when we were kids. We were taught to hate each other and to mistrust each other. And nowadays, well, they're kind of moving away from it now, but I want to say maybe like in the early 2000s, you could see young black women loved each other. They cared about each other. They complimented each other. And when I grew up, that was unheard of. It was unheard of.
Yeah, no, that's definitely valid. And touching on what we spoke about earlier, a little bit about self-hate, and that there have been movements that have been created to counteract that.
Yeah.
If you go on social media, a lot of times you'll see things like, girls celebrating their natural hair, just like the way it comes out, and people promoting that. Other women of color saying, right on, that's what you got to do, supporting that idea. So there are movements that are created to counteract what has been done to our psyche, what has been done to our mentality.
I think that presumption of inferiority evolved out of a desire for us to be inferior because we weren't allowed to read, we weren't considered as human beings. and I don't think it's because they necessarily thought that we weren't capable of it, but it was compelled more out of their need to be superior.
Absolutely. Yeah, to create a notion.
Absolutely.
These two are created notions. These are created ideas that are used to oppress. You know, did you have something in? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you raised your hand. It's fine. But yeah, no, absolutely. You know, these aren't real. These differences that are spoken about aren't real. They're things that were created in order to, you know, perpetuate things like slavery, things like Jim Crow, things like, you know, convict leasing, because, you know, it works for them. Moving forward, you know, when we talk about a lot of the issues that we face now, you know, between police brutality, between mass incarceration, and then we look at a lot of the issues that we've studied about and learned about between slavery, Jim Crow, and civil rights, we don't necessarily see the immediate connection between what happened then and what's going on now. And that's what I want to talk about here with this understanding of the modern forms of discrimination. You know, what a lot of modern black scholars are saying now is that, you know, discrimination and racism never ended, it just changed its shape. And we see it today in these iterations, that we see it in the statistics that we see, but it's hard for people to really explain why is it exactly that African Americans are in the ghetto? Why is it exactly that they're being thrown into droves? We know it's racism, but we don't exactly know how to explain it. So, modern discrimination. These are a couple of the points that talk about a couple of the legal things that happen to continue to discriminate against African Americans. There are more. There are a lot of other things that I'll be leaving out, but for the sake of this presentation, these are the ones we're going to focus on. So, in the 1930s, our country went through the Great Depression. It was a period in which, like, it was difficult for everybody. You know, the average person just didn't have enough for themselves. So the government made programs to help people, and one of these major programs was loan distributions to families so that they can go out and buy houses. Well, we were still under the Jim Crow era, and African Americans couldn't get these loans. So when you look at the 1930s, when that first drove of African Americans started leaving the South, to avoid lynching and things like, you know, very visible oppression, there was an inability to reach that middle class standard, an inability to, you know, these white families and were able to go out and buy homes and get loans from banks because of the depression, and these African American families weren't. So that was one of the first steps. The next step was in 1949. There was a housing policy that was enacted that basically made it so that the first, actually going back, you know, it was difficult to get loans in the 1930s, moving onward for African Americans from the government. It was also difficult to get loans from the private sector, from banks. Banks also began discriminating against African Americans in terms of getting loans, in a form of racism known as redlining. And this has to do with realtors and banks and basically how they determine the value of a neighborhood. So let's say we have a small neighborhood, and, you know, if a bank is offering a loan or something to move into this neighborhood, they're going to have to take an estimate of how much it costs to be in this neighborhood. Well, now when African Americans started moving into these neighborhoods, the bank started depreciating the value of these homes in a way that made it so that it was economically disadvantageous to live in these communities, so the people that had the resources to move out were able to move out. So, you know, at this point, you're starting to create droves of these African American communities. You're starting to see these droves of African Americans that are being stuck in this trap of an inner city with no real way out, because, you know, the banks are telling them they aren't worth as much, and they don't have the resources to move out because they're just leaving this period of segregation. They're just leaving this period of overt racism, and so that starts to create the inner city. That starts to create, you know, this concentration of African Americans in these areas. In 1949, the Fair Housing Act was, or the Housing Act was passed, which started to destroy a lot of these houses in a process known as urban renewal. So what that did was it took away a lot of these, like the houses and the structures there, in exchange for project buildings. And in the 1940s, we started making project buildings. And with these buildings, they were government officiated buildings, but there was a minimal on how, or a maximum on how much you could make if you were to live in these buildings. So now you have this inner city, this vacuum where a lot of the wealth is already left. And then you're in a situation where if you have wealth, you can't move in. So people are moving out. There's no real way to like build that wealth and move out, and there's nothing in that community that is going to like help you move out, like such as a loan from a bank or such as a loan from the government. And this continued for a long period of time. So now we're here in a creation, and we've created these ghettos, as we call them, or these projects, or these inner cities. Moving forward, in the 1970s, 1980s, and even into the 1990s, our government administration began this policy known as the war on drugs. The war on drugs was something that happened because our governments decided that, you know, it would be politically advantageous to run on a campaign that said we're tough on drugs and we care about your community, and we're going to do everything we can to get them out. So that's when things like minimal sentence laws came into play. That's when things like the 100-to-1 comparison of crack cocaine sentencing to powder cocaine came into play, when our administration on both sides of the government, so this isn't a partisan issue, both Democratic and Republican sides of the government were pushing policies to punish users of drugs and illegal substances very harshly. So what they said and what was explained and what was told to the community, to the Americans, was that we're enacting a war on drugs. What actually happened was a war on black people. And in this war on drugs, communities, these ghettos, these pockets of inner cities that were created because of these housing policies were targeted. You know, this is where the drugs are. You need to go in and you need to make these arrests here. You need to meet these quotas. And when you send them to jail, they need to be put in jail for this much time. And these are the policies that really began to rip apart this community, to tear at this community in a way so sinister that, you know, you didn't even realize it was happening. It wasn't until years later that books began to be written on these policies, or that because there was nothing in these policies that said black people. There was nothing in these policies that said people of color or descendants of slaves. But because of the legacy, because of the history of this country, because of things like this presumption of criminality that is within our law enforcement, that is within our communities, that makes us want to target these young black youths.
I think the No Child Left Behind policy had that same exact effect on our community.
Yeah, no, there were a lot of specific policies, and a lot of them you can look at now and see how they unfairly targeted African Americans and made things difficult. And so, you know, the biggest iteration of this discrimination that we're seeing today right now is mass incarceration. So we live in a system and we live in a country where corporations can make money off people being put into prison. The prison is an industrial complex in which people literally can put their stock into, and on the basis of this prison being full, you can make profit. So this drove hordes and hordes and hordes of African Americans into prisons because of this war on drugs, or this war on African Americans, that began ripping apart these communities, tearing up black males out of these communities, making it harder for single parents to take care of their kids. And one of the most sinister things about mass incarcerations and going to jail is that there really isn't any kind of redemption or reintegration into the community. You go to jail once, and that's it. You come out and you can't apply for housing, public housing. You can't apply for a job. Can't vote. You know, a lot of these things that are given to the average citizen are taken away, and it's almost like you're reverted hundreds of years back and don't have the same rights as anyone else. And none of these policies say the word black in them anywhere. None of these things, you know, illicitly state African Americans. But if you look at the statistics, this is the effect of the policies that were enacted in the recent years that have disadvantaged African Americans and that have basically begun to rip apart our communities. So I'll pause here for comments and questions, statements, thoughts.
Are you saying that all of these prisons are publicly traded companies?
Not all of them, but private corporations, the private prison industrial complex can make contracts with the federal government. And basically when you make one of these contracts, there's an incentive to keep the prison full. So to keep it at maximum occupancy, like make sure every single bed is full, so that it can continue to run.
Okay,
you know.
so they're not actually selling shares to the...
Well, you can, so there are companies that are hired that are licensed to work in the prison. So from the people that do your laundry, to your linens, or the people that provide the food, and the healthcare in the prisons, these are private companies.
Right, and the actual prisons themselves, they're not publicly traded.
No, not specifically. Yeah, but there is a way to benefit.
When they're doing this right as we're talking, within a lot of with this affordable housing, Bloomberg's affordable housing programs, that if a parent or a couple, you know, whether they're family or, you know, small family, and say the father, usually it's the father, goes to jail, or a son, when he comes out, because it's public housing, or it's under affordable housing, they can't move back in. And if they move back in, they are targeted. They are targeted by cameras. They have cameras in these buildings that, you know, security might be behind. They have it so that they can, okay, the camera's over there and you're over here. Zoom in, they have a photo. And then they're people, just like we call those bounty hunters. They check the records and check everything, and they see somebody that's wanted or has warrants up. The police are there to pick them up, and then the next thing they're saying to the mother or the wife, they will then have to move if they allow this person to come back in. So this is how they're dismantling the communities. And right now, with this affordable housing, this is what it's all, there's more laws in an affordable housing lease than anything I've ever seen in my life. It's very, very sad. And the thing that's sad about it is the things that people that it's perpetuated upon, they don't even realize. And if you told them,
resources to fight it.
Right, and if you told them, you know, that this what is going on, they don't want. They look at you know, you're like you're crazy. You know that they don't want to. It's not that they don't want to believe it. They would rather believe that it's somebody, you know, maybe that ratted them out, and that's how they got. They don't want to believe that the larger picture is doing this. You know, and it's very sad. It's very sad because, you know, you see, I was an advocate for families that were either losing their apartments on this or their children, and it was heart-wrenching. I thought I could, you know, help. But it's really very heart-wrenching. I'm there at courts with them, and you can't really. They're telling you, you know, help them, talk to them, but they're trying to get you, who's supposed to be helping the parent, to side with them to put these people in jail or put them out of their homes. Very, very. It's like a double-edged sword. Very sad.
Definitely. See, you know, you can think of plenty of examples of how there's a system working against underprivileged, underclass, undereducated African Americans who are the result of earlier policies that put them there.
Right.
You know. Any other comments, thoughts, or questions on the back?
I've heard somebody say that more money is made when someone goes to prison as opposed to somebody going to school. They make more money off of this person being in prison.
Yeah. Public school, no, yeah, you definitely make more sending someone to prison than in a public school because, you know, a lot of these aspects of our society that, you know, other countries would consider them public or private. When you privatize something, somebody has an incentive and they can make money off of it. You know, the second you can allow someone to make money off of someone else, it'll get exploited. And that's just the nature of the game. No one's sitting down and looking at, like, all right, who am I hurting right now? Who is being affected by these policies? They're affecting a large group of people in an unfair way. And oftentimes, these people that are being affected don't even realize it.
A lot of the things from this, you know, the housing, the way they manipulate the people out, a lot of the things that were there for the teenagers or the children. Like I know, I grew up in Harlem, and as a child I went swimming, I had arts classes. I went somewhere every day of the week besides the Salvation Army, my co-cadets and so forth. Well, except the Salvation Army still has their co-cadets and their Bible Bowl and stuff. All the buildings that had pools in it, except one, the one across the street in Hampton, they have, the buildings are now shelters. Okay, they've taken away the women's walk. There is nothing. And the other night on television, I was seeing on the news, they've got the kids run these dirt bikes, the teenage young men. I don't know, they save their money, they buy the gas, and they just run up and down, you know, whatever. And they're making it criminal. I mean, kids in the suburbs, you know, the Caucasian kids, they're doing the same thing on their dirt bikes, you know, they can make a road or whatever. These kids are coming and they're, you know, raising back and everything, and they're showing off to the other guy. And that's just what they're doing, they're showing off. They're not trying to hurt anybody. But then there's a lot of gentrification going on, and the people don't like it, and so they started complaining to the police. And I saw one woman complaining to the policeman, and I said, they're not bothering you. They're not bothering you, they're having fun. These are teenage young men having fun. She said, you may call it fun, it's dangerous. I said, why is it dangerous? What's it doing to you? If you hear that coming down the street, don't get off the sidewalk. Let them go by, you know? And then when I saw it, this was about a year or two ago, then when I saw it on the news right recently, this past weekend, it really upset me, because I said, then they're going to be trying to arrest these kids, and when they do, not arrest them, they take their bikes and they, you know, run the steamers over and mash these kids. You know, I don't know how they got their money, but this is what their entertainment is, because there's nothing else around to do. There are no dance halls to go to. There used to be teenage dance halls at the Y, all the churches had a Friday night social or whatever. There's nothing like that. Nothing. And they take away everything. Harlem and the Bronx itself, they make the kids hate each other, you know, because one can't just go in, they don't want one to think they're better than the other. It's really very bad. If you listen at the level, I like to listen to teenagers or the young people talking, and sometimes I interject, you know, my sister will say, why don't you have to say something? I said, yeah, because they don't know. You know, I said, don't take it out on each other. Don't compete. Try to, you know, work it together and smooth something else out. But it is just such a, not even competition, it's a self-hate way of dealing with each other. Even if they were friends or whatever, they don't know how to talk to each other nicely, you know, because of this way they have to be. And it's not just with the drugs or anything. It's just they have nothing to do. And now before, something that they call, you know, you stood out on your stoop and you talk. Big signs, no trespassing. So where do they go? You know, they're not bringing all these kids into your home. You know, you stand outside, you go to the basketball court and you play. Now they turn the lights out of the basketball or the volleyball court. What do you turn the lights out for? The kids are in there playing basketball. Okay? It's just so oppressive. You know the kids smoke the marijuana. Okay, so they're in the park, and if they're sitting, the guys are talking, you know, and of course the smoke rises. The police sit up in the sun and say, they sit up there, and when they smell it, they call down, and here comes the scooter to pick the kids up. So it's really very, very oppressive. They have a dog walk up there, and I walked with my friend with his dog, and it's like, we see all of this stuff. We could never find it. You wouldn't even go in that park when we were younger. Now you can walk in that park 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. That's how many police. They have mounted police in Harlem going through that park. Because of the Caucasian women that are running through there at 5 o'clock in the morning. That, you know, I wouldn't even walk in there at 5 o'clock in the evening.
The thing is, the resolve has to be to find something for them to do.
Yeah.
We can't say that, but we can't as a society say that the police can't implement some kind of restrictions against things that are against the law. It's unfortunate that they have had to resort to illegal activity to entertain themselves. But the police have to be involved. We can't be a lawless society, and things that are against the law are against the law.
Playing basketball is not against the law. Running a dirt bike, no.
Those dirt bikes aren't supposed to be on the street. That's not legal for them to be on the street.
Why is it not legal?
They're not registered vehicles. They're not registered vehicles. Those are off-road vehicles. They are not supposed to be on the street. And unfortunately, in our communities, we don't have the places where they are legal. We don't have those trails and things like that. There's no place for those vehicles in our community.
I think one of the main points that you two are going at each other, and both of you are right in a certain way, you know, are coming at it is, look, this is the law, this is what exists, and you know, the other idea is that, but this is all we have, you know. You're trying to justify a situation where one group has very limited resources against a system of laws that should apply to everyone equally. But it can't apply to everyone equally if this group has less. So in this specific case that you're talking about, oh, dirt bikes, no one should really have them in the streets because, you know, like it's dangerous and we shouldn't have them. But there are no countrysides for these African Americans in Harlem to go out to ride their bikes. And that's not their fault. It's because of all the things we spoke about. You're trapped in the inner city. You're trapped. You can't get out of these situations. So, you know, a lot of this friction that happens between the laws that are built and the laws that are written are supposed to be applied equally throughout the land. But we see that they hurt certain communities more because of this history. You know, so moving this conversation a little bit along, one of the things that, or I guess to just like recap everything that we were just speaking on, is that it's very important to understand the way these issues work, the way these issues have happened over time and time again, and reiterate itself, for us to really have productive dialogue about fixing it. So what's the modern outcome of all these policies? Well, we hinted on a lot of the statistics. I'm sure a lot of you have heard a lot of these numbers, a lot of these things that, you know, basically show that despite laws that are no longer illicitly racially biased, like clearly racially biased that anyone can see, you have an outcome where one group of people is affected worse than any other group of people. You know, things like African Americans incarcerated 6 times the rate of white people in this country, and the number, you know, if these rates continue on, like if you look at the trend and they continue, then 1 out of every 3 African American males will be incarcerated at some point in their lives, which is incredibly scary. You know, and then, you know, other statistics, when you look at drugs and the treatment and the sentencing of drugs, is that, you know, as you mentioned earlier, in a lot of studies show that 5 times as many whites are using drugs as African Americans, and yet African Americans are sent to prison for drug offenses at 10 times the rate of whites. That number is slightly inflated by the fact that there are more white people in the country, but this discrepancy that they're sent to prisons at 10 times the rate of whites is the inequality. That's incredibly unequal.
Yeah.
You know.
Is it legal to not hire somebody because they served time in jail?
It shouldn't be, but it is.
Yeah, that's legal.
See, that's what we're saying. That's what you're saying. Like, your criminal record has you have to check off that box that says I am a criminal.
Yeah.
But I'm saying though, is it legal to do you know what I'm saying? Because there are laws against anti-discrimination. Is it legal not to hire somebody because they serve?
They can justify it by saying that it's safety for the other employees, especially if it was a violent offense. If, you know, or if somebody was caught theft, then I don't feel comfortable with you in my building. You know, they should have a clean slate, right? But that's not how society works.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things that is driving a lot of these conversations. The fact that the law doesn't protect a certain group of people equally. You know, we have one set of laws, but it affects one group worse than another group. And that's where this inequality comes from. So, one of the major things that I want us all to get out of this is that, you know, when we're talking about our community, when we're talking about like what can we do, and we'll have a small dialogue about like solutions, potential solutions, like different things people think work, is that inequality and inferiority and these things that we're facing now is not inherent to black skin. It's not because we have the skin that we're dealing with these problems. You know, there's nothing that's in my genetic code that makes me more likely to be a criminal. There's nothing in us that is affecting us and causing us to experience these things. It's this history that we experience being in this country. And I think, you know, one of the biggest things that are preventing us from coming together as a community and talking about it is because it's gotten so bad that we started to believe it ourselves. We've gotten to a point where people are starting to believe this presumption of criminality. It's not just white cops or white police officers that are you know, shooting African Americans. It's black police officers too. It's not just white women that are, you know, clenching their purse when they see an African American walk by. It's black people too.
Yeah.
You know, I'd be lying myself if I didn't say there was a part of me that was inherently, you know, aware of the statistics that showed African Americans on the news as criminals, and that prepared myself for something if I were to walk through a group of African American men, even though I have been that group of African American men. Like, I have been that group of dudes just that look scary for some reason, you know? So one of the biggest problems is that it's coming into us, and it's making it harder for us to come together and trust one another and work with one another and try to see these solutions. You know, a kid comes back from jail and we're not addressing it, we're not forgiving him, we're not working him back into our community, we're not helping him reintegrate because we see him as a criminal, because that's what they want us to see him as. But that's your brother, you know? We're buying into this idea of inferiority. We don't want to work with each other. We don't want to support one another because of this history and this lack of understanding of how it's worked against us. We've started to believe that for some reason it might be true, and that's one of the biggest things that I want to talk against.
Well, I feel like in a way that they're making it true. I mean, when you impress a certain group of people for so long, and they start to believe it, they start acting like it. So it's not just that, you know, I mean, if you walk through like the place she was talking about, certain places where, you know, there's a lot of criminal activity, and because of the situation of the country and the government, what they've done, it's mostly black. I mean, but anybody, if they would walk through that area, might feel that way.
Yeah.
But it's not their fault, is all I'm saying. It's like just the way society has set everything up, that they're actually believing this. So it is sometimes hard to trust someone from certain, you know, areas, or, you know, from certain places that wherever, like if you want to say like a really bad project or it has a really bad reputation, and there's a black man who's trying to get into like a white business, you know, I mean,
that's real. That's very real.
Yeah, I mean, because even if he was trying to get into a black business, they're not going to trust him.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't look trustworthy, he comes from a place that's, you know, doesn't raise up trustworthy people, and he may even believe in his mind, let me try to get in here so I can like rob these white people. But that's how he's been conditioned to think. You know, so it's like we kind of got to break that too. We got to get in there and break that. I got to rob other people to survive. I got to take yours so I can get mine, because everything's been taken from me.
Yeah.
So it's really like in their minds too. You know, they're believing that
it's in their minds because it's on television, it's on your phone, it's not showing the white guys that, you know, probably twice as many is doing that, but the media is not showing that the white guy did it. Oh, he's got a black one, let's put that on, splash this all over. What are our young men saying? Oh, you know, just another, you know, black man. Of course, see, we told you, there he is. But they didn't tell you about the 3 other white ones that did the same thing. They didn't show that on TV.
Or the fact that everything he had was taken from him.
Right.
They even resort to that lifestyle.
Yeah, no, that's very real. Like this presumption has become a reality. There are very real effects for this made-up
There are
idea.
people that I feel like
And it's hard for people, it's hard for the criminal, even if he's a young man, to re-enter back into society and his family's life because of the laws that they're placing against them with the housing. And if you put in for, say, a scholarship loan, unless it's under some kind of special program, they can't get a scholarship to go to school. And some of these young men are very bright, conniving. When you could say, you can call it conniving, but if they really use their brains the right way, they could excel in
Right, they could, right.
Yeah.
But because they're set upon in a different way, their family, if I love my son again, I'm going to lose my apartment. Or if I love this man again, who's the father of my children, and he comes back into the house, and with all these cameras up the wazoo in the building, and they see a picture of him, they come and pick him up. And heaven forbid if the woman had to maybe take a court order out, if he was violent or whatever, then that's twice as bad.
Yeah.
Because if she lets him back in the home, they're going to want to put her out.
Yeah.
And this now, there are cases in court right now that are trying to fight the police for coming and evicting these people, like the wife or whoever, because you didn't want to. Unbelievable. And it's funny now, we used to have people who would take pro bono cases, to fight this, but we can't find those kind of pro bono lawyers anymore.
We talk about this all the time because we struggle as single mothers. I'm a single mother. I have two 17-year-old boys. And, there just isn't, enough black male role models, for them, to teach them, because of the situation. A lot of them are incarcerated. We got absentee fathers. And so, the only thing they do see is on TV, you're robbing, and, we're trying to counteract that by putting them in positive situations. But then the streets and the media is, pulling them in the opposite direction. So it's really hard to, because we don't have enough black men stepping up and, let me show you, everybody is not criminals. There are successful black men. Let us show you how to be one too, not fall into the pattern that, that's in the streets. It's really hard, especially when you're a single mom and you don't have, the black male stepping up, even if it's not your son, somebody, right.
I'm at the point where I'm like, somebody.
That ties back.
But they don't have to be like, just hit me out.
That ties back into, I'll let you go in a second. That ties back into what my dad was bringing this whole idea about around community. When you have a healthy community, when you have people in your church who can step up and talk to that your kid that's acting up in class before he gets to that point. If you have a community, a group of people that support one another and that are going to look out for him just on the basis of him having the same skin. Just because of that. You don't even have to know him, but he's going to look out for him. That's a healthy community. That is a structure that we can aim towards. You were saying something?
Because I was talking to them, my son wanted to be an officer, right? So I'm like, going to be an officer. So, they are kind of working with him, but he's African American. So the officers that are African American, what struggles do they have going into the Salvation Army? Is it the same? They need to know that, and they need mentors. My son, now he doesn't want to be an officer now, so it's a struggle because he doesn't have anybody saying, this is what you need to do to be an officer. Because our leadership changed. So then the person he had a relationship with that was helping him now was in Philadelphia now. So now we are trying to figure out what he wants to do. But I think that we really need to have the thing for the boys. I've been saying this for how many years? About 6 years. And we are a family, and they do take care and watch out for our boys. They do. They'll take them. They're with the youth pastors this weekend, but it's still difficult when you are trying to raise African American males. And I'm a teacher, so I work in the project, so I drive through yellow tape every day. And I tell the kids in my class that you're better than this. So it doesn't matter what society tells you who you are. This is who you are. So I think it's just part of the solution is giving them more, I'm telling them who they are and feeding into them and giving them information and educating them. Because education
can change a lot of people's lives.
Yeah.
Because my friend, I mean, he was homeless, and he was all these different things, and he is like the superintendent of the school system now. So it doesn't, I mean, he took care of himself, and so he speaks to a lot of African Americans. He was my oldest son's mentor, and he lives in Cleveland, but there really is really having people and mentors for these kids and to change their lives. Because my brother, he was in jail, he's incarcerated, he sold drugs, he went back to selling drugs, and he got killed. So it doesn't, I think that you have to have a mindset, you have to change your mindset. And I think that if communities, because people are like, you drive through the projects, they know, I have a rapport with those people. They know this is her car, they don't mess with my car, they make sure that I'm driving through, no one touches my car. If I leave work at 8 o'clock at night, the teenage boys from the high school students will walk me to my car if they're coming for football. They don't really bother me because they know I've been working in that community and I have a rapport with those people. And that I don't ever think that I will never be where they are because I've been there.
Yeah, no. And that's coming into a little bit more of this discussion of solutions. And we can open it up and there are plenty of working solutions that will help, go against this institutional racism that has been enacted against us. But one thing, and people agree and disagree on different practices. Some people say, oh, that wouldn't work, oh, that would work. But one thing that every leading scholar, every community, every group of people does know works is sticking together and having each other's back and working with each other despite the differences, despite the cultural differences, despite the gang differences, despite all these little things that were made up to divide us, and what coming together does is it makes us stronger as a whole. So we can continue if there are any other ideas, what do you think we as Christians, we as a community of believers can also do to support one another and move on?
I think we really need to get back more out into the community. I feel like we stay, and I didn't just talk about my core, but I feel like we stay in our core too much. My core, I'm in Lowell, Massachusetts. We are on the biggest drug street in the city of Lowell. And I'm like you, I don't ever feel like anything would happen to me or my car. I know the drug users, the drug sellers, and they know me by name, or they call me the Salvation Army lady because I bring food out to them. But at the same time, the only time we seem to have conversations with those people is when they come in to use our bathroom. We're not going up to them. And then we just recently noticed that there's a new group of a younger group that's on the street lately that's been coming in to use the bathroom. It was a 16-year-old boy. So I feel like we just need to get back out into the community, and not so much trying to get them to church, but we need to hear these people out. We need to get on their level and hear their story and find out what their problems is and what's driving them, and to just make that initial connection, and then let the Holy Spirit do the rest.
Definitely, that's important. That's extremely important.
And I think us as a group, one of the advantages that we have is the Salvation Army, because the Salvation Army, people that don't even know that the Salvation Army is a church, the Salvation Army is a place of refuge. So our shield serves as an advantage for us to be able to open doors, to develop relationships, to try to find practical resolve for the dilemmas that are facing us.
Sometimes we need, in the Salvation Army, I know when I was coming up as a kid in the Salvation Army, and I would go visit some of the other corps when I worked at some of the camps, and being one of the first people of color to work in the area and in the camp, and I would go visit the other kids who were maybe at the camp, their home, their town, or their corps. And I would say, whoa, look at their corps. Look at why don't we have a corps like this, and we don't have this and we don't have that. So maybe about 5 years ago, some of the kids came back they went to visit some other corps, and they came back and they said, oh, you know what they got? They got this, and why come we don't have that? And I said, oh, and I was like, why can't we say, how are they still saying the same thing that I was saying? So then one night on television this summer, they were showing one of the Croc centers, and they showed the kids running and jumping in the pool. I said, the Croc Center has a pool. We don't have a pool. I went swimming every single day of my life from when I was about 7 to, say, 15, 16. So to see somewhere a pool in the sun, and knowing that we don't have one here in New York City, I think that the Marple had a pool at one time. And I said, then what did they do with the pools? If you don't go to the 92nd Street Y or Lexington or the one over on the west side, we have the, the center you said, by Rose Kennedy Center, they have a pool. But it's not everybody can go into these pools because they don't, want certain kids that are going to come with their pants hanging, and they don't know how to swim. So the kids are not being introduced to anything that could be useful to them. We had people who, when they finished the drum and bugle corps, when they grew up in it, they came and they started another drum and bugle corps. I know my mother, she had the Girl Guards, and some even Girl Guards. And she would go around to different buildings in the project, from 127th Street to 131st Street. And she would go and pick up girls every Friday night, whole slew of kids. And if the elevator was out of order, the person lived on the foot, my mother walked up 14 flights, took that girl, put her inside her door to make sure these girls would have somewhere to go on every Friday night. Regardless of how the parents were responding, sometimes the parents didn't come to any programs or when the kids got their badges or anything, but just to keep those kids safe. And when I would see some of these young women today with their own children, some of them have grandchildren, they're saying to me, oh, we loved when your mother did this, or when you came and did that, or whatever. I says, well, come back to the court. Do you go to church? No. It's a hard thing to keep those kind of transient kids. We have to find a way to keep them coming back and keep them in the court. I know when I'm one of the, well, there's only 3 of us now that are of my age that went all the way through, from little kids to, and the other kids who came in as transient kids, through the programs, you don't see them. And maybe I might run into them every now and then, even sometimes to the parents. But other than that, I was wondering what a solution we need to find out why they don't stay. And I think what it is the name Salvation Army. I think that's what it is. Because whenever I say, up to recently, this past summer, I said to somebody, I go to Salvation Army. Salvation Army, so we had a program and I invited them to. They were like, they have things like this in the Salvation, that big building on 137th to 138th Street. That people just walk by it. If they walk, I stood outside the other day and watched them, invite them, and we had an open house. I'm staying outside, inviting them in. And I'm a person that can talk to just about anybody. And hey, you come, we got cake in there, we have pie and whatever. And they're looking at the building. You can't see the bricks. You gotta come inside and see what we have going inside there. We have music lessons. We have teachers coming from, Juilliard or Manhattan School of Music, teaching the kids music for like an orchestra or whatever. It's really, I just wonder why they didn't want to look. Then we can go to another neighborhood and the kids come to our neighborhood for these same programs, but not the kids that are in the neighborhood that need those programs. They won't send their kids. Or if they do, they don't make them practice and then the kids drop out.
What do you think it is? You mentioned earlier that you said it's the name, the Salvation Army.
I think people think that they want to call it the Starvation Army. And I tell the kids, I says, look, when I wore a uniform, when I was a kid, I wore a bonnet. Okay, my friends would see me coming down the street. They would sit on the curb and they would laugh till they would wet their pants laughing at me with my big bonnet on the side. It never bothered me. But that's just the way that what they would do with me, because they went to different churches and we wanted to get together afterwards. I never went home and changed my uniform or anything like that. But this is the way that, it was looked at. And I don't think, to tell you the truth, except for when my mother passed, her funeral, did any of those friends of mine from school, from high school and college, ever come into the Salvation Army? Because of the Salvation Army, the name.
I see down in Philadelphia, I see that the community has a different perspective. And when I say that we need to take advantage of this shield, because virtually there is no corporate headquarters that will refuse the Salvation Army. When you have limited resources or you need things donated to your court, virtually nobody is going to say no. When you go out and ask, for things, we have to partner, with organizations that have a plan to help build our children, that have programs on top of our programs, that can benefit our children. The thing is, while the Salvation Army can do a lot and is able to do a lot, we can't isolate ourselves in our communities. We have to have viable partnerships with other entities within our communities, you know, whether it be social services agencies, schools, you know, whatever resources that we can. It has to be a collaboration. We can't fix it by ourselves. We have to be able to collaborate with other organizations.
A lot of times when people come to us, they come to us in a crisis, and they want answers in that crisis, and when the crisis is over, they want to move on. They don't want to be stuck in this, as they may call it, a groove or whatever.
So what I think we're talking about right now is a branding image or branding issue in terms of the Salvation Army, like what people think when they see the Salvation Army and how people view it. You're talking about a very positive and useful image in the Salvation Army, in that it has such a good name in the community that anytime you use it, people are like, oh, I know that organization, I trust them.
Right.
You know? But you're talking about a negative stigma that has come up with younger kids who kind of see it as like, oh, that's not a cool thing, or that's not like something that I want to associate myself with, possibly because of things like homelessness, because of poverty, and I don't know if I want to associate with that. And I think that those are generational issues. You know, the older groups of people, even, you know, kids that grew up in the 80s, 90s, know, like, the Salvation Army is a positive thing. But maybe this younger generation isn't necessarily getting that message. So what can we do to rebrand or reintroduce the Salvation Army into these younger groups of kids so that they, you know, can start to understand these things? But, you know, do we have any other ideas in terms of this history of discrimination and what it takes to really build a community? Because that's what we want to tie this all around. This idea of what the Black community in our country, in our neighborhoods, in our cores really is lacking, and what we can do to make us once again have each other's backs, like we did back in the 60s, back when we were wearing our afros and marching. So we can have each other's backs, like, you know, like that, like they do in African communities, like they do in Hispanic communities, where if someone needs something, they're there for them.
Our problem is, as African Americans, we judge each other, yes we do. And our biggest judgment is, you can't get ahead of them, you can't get more than me. If one person got more than another one, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Whether it's the drug dealer on the corner that got a sneaker than the other drug dealer, or he's catching too many cells, it's a problem. And like the African Americans, the Africans, the Puerto Ricans, the Dominicans, one thing about them that Black people don't do, they stick to their own kind. They help their own kind by any means necessary. Meaning if they know where a job at, or they need a ride, it's 6 Mexicans in the car going to work. You can't get a Black person to give you a ride. They too high strung on themselves because they feel they better than you and hear it. With in the Black community, they like to glorify, they like to talk about, but they gotta understand, you can't glorify nothing if you both in the same boat. How you trying to act like you bigger than me, and you got roaches, I got roaches, and your sister down the street probably got more roaches than me. You gotta treat people how you wanna be treated. When I meet anybody, my sister will tell you I treat everybody the same. I could be pissed off all day long, I walk around with a smile. If you walk in, attitude, I'm gonna change your attitude by the time you get ready to walk out that door. As in the Black community, you have to treat everybody the same, but everybody live by that stigma of a Black man. You already got 3 strikes against you. Once you're Black, 2, you got a winky, and 3, white women like you.
You know what to say? There's some truth to that. Sometimes we destroy ourselves, okay? I can give you an example of young Black people want to become officers, and the officer discouraged them.
Yes.
Including myself. The senior officer told me, oh, you got 2 master's degree, don't have to join up.
Yeah, they don't want you to get ahead.
Another young person want to go to training, this officer wrote a bad letter to RDC, is this and that. And this guy is an officer, he's still more productive than is former Corps officer. So we have to learn to encourage our own people instead of discourage. We do that a lot. And yet the Hispanics are coming, they're prospering.
Yeah.
You know, illegal people are prospering, and they're taking advantages of the privileges that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the door that he opened for us. I'll just giving this morning an example. In Harvard University, okay, Ivy League school, 40% of blacks in Harvard are all Nigerians. Okay? The kids of Nigeria come, they're so aggressive, they come, so they're sending the kids to the school. Those opportunities are original for African American, born here, parents are here. But they don't know that if you're making below, you're getting below 40,000 a year, your child, if he's smart, can go to Harvard for free. My son went to Ivy League school because officer, we don't get that much. So my son goes to best school because I know that. I don't make, and there's an opportunity, so we don't take advantage. When we know, we keep that to ourselves. Okay, we don't share that.
Because I don't want to share, I don't want you to get what.
One time we had a lot of turkey at my Corps, and we spread the news come, and kids, the Hispanic, I mean, one saw, and the lot of Hispanic can get a turkey, so two black women. I said, why don't you call her for black? I mind my own business, okay? That you do you, I do me, it's stupid. I get us anywhere, okay? So sometimes we are our own, we're stopping our own young people to join the army, to open opportunity for them. We have to be open. You know, we cannot survive and just be critical while we are discouraging our own young people.
I'm glad you said that about officers not encouraging some of, the young people or that want to be officers or whatever. I was in the Colonel's program, Back to the Future, this morning, and I had to say to the Colonel that after McIntyre, and he came after him, those were at Harlem Temple, and not negating anybody else, they all did jobs. Those were two of the very finest officers that I've ever seen, in which I'm limited, I didn't go to all the corps, how they dealt with their young people. Colonel McIntyre, he had two sons, his sons were going, he said he wanted every young person in that Harlem Temple at the time. My sister was at that age, his kids. They all went to college. He said, you have homework, bring your books to the meeting and do your homework in the meeting. Colonel Johnson would say, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to be doing? This, and they made sure that each and every child was, given that opportunity or that push, if they needed it, whatever kind of home they came from, to succeed. And when you said the offices, not only does it happen at the church level, I'm a teacher. I was working in Chinatown. Then I said, no, I'm going to go take my good skills and I'm going to go to a school where children look like me and represent my family. And I met some black teachers. I went to, and they would say, oh, you're going to give them all that homework, you're going to do all of this, because those little so-and-sos, they're not going to do this and they're not going to do that. And I really got very, very, very offended. I made lots of enemies because, and I would say to them, no, I'm going to teach them what they need to know. And sometimes they didn't want us to teach it in the curriculum. And I says, no, this is what I learned in college. I'm going to do it this way. Well, if you teach them this, if you teach them geometry in the 5th grade, what are we going to teach them when they get to the 6th grade or whatever? I said, teach them the next step. That's all you teach them, the next thing.
I'll give you an example. In Greater New York Division, the Hispanics are mushrooming. You know what? Because they go tell the people, hey, you know how to preach whatever, why don't you join the Salvation Army? I mean, you go to youth camp, whatever, 70% are Hispanic kids. They make an altar call, they encourage the young people, but we don't do that.
No.
And yet you complain, how come we don't have a black DC? I mean, you don't have them in the field. You have maybe 5%. How can you expect to have a black TC when you don't have them in the field? So it's about us, okay? And it's sad. It's sad that there's a young man came from the corner city, his co-officer said, you're not officer material, I cannot make it. This guy is a bishop, he has his own church, about 400 people, he sits in President Obama's commission for churches, and he is there. And this officer, you can't make it. Black officer, I can tell all kind of things. I've been in the system. So we have to change that mentality. Okay, we have to change that.
Not wanting somebody to get ahead of you. I don't care if you get ahead of me. I'm gonna let you know what I know. If I know you need a job, or you need a ride, or you need something, I'm surely gonna let you know. Because why keep you down? Why keep it to myself? Because I already know what it is and what it's about. I have 7 kids. I have a 19-year-old in college. By the grace of God, and I thank Him well that I am not no grandmother. My daughter went straight to school. She graduated a year before her time. She's on her 3rd year in college, and she's going overseas. And I tell her, and I pray to her, and I always say, do not be like your mother. I want you to be better than me. Don't look at what I did and be halfway. I want you to look at what I did, the struggle that I went through, and flourish. And I tell all my kids that you can be better than me. I do like the court that we are in, because it is men that will take the kids. In order to treat the kids right and get the kids in, we have to treat them like they're our own. We got to be that questionable parent, whether they got a parent that drinks, smoke, party all night long. But when we see them, we want to know, okay, what you do in school today? How was your grades? What you tell the teacher? How you act in school? Because I treat people how I want to be treated. And I treat people how I want to be treated. And I learned that's the only way you can go far. That's the only way you can grasp hold to somebody. Treat them. You kill them with kindness. That's the worst kill you could possibly do. But in the community, you see a lot of people, they don't care about kindness. They don't care about nothing else but a fast dollar and a drink. Standing on the corner to get money to buy an outfit, but you're not getting money to buy an outfit. You get money to pay a bondsman. That's what you get money for, because you're standing on the corner getting your money the wrong way.
So one thing I'd say, we heard the issue, we saw what's happening. The reason I called my son, because a lot of things I didn't know. I'm glad I sent him to school that's teaching me, hey, Dad, look at what is happening. We need to share that. We know the issue, how can we help our people? Okay, I'm not trying to discriminate here. Okay, I'm just saying, we know the system. What can we do? We need to share. We have information sharing. Okay.
So please finish your presentation based on that. Well, I'm very interested about.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Then it's part of.
No, the other part, the Koreans.
Yeah.
It says African Americans marched against the protested the Koreans.
This one?
Right there, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, this was more my dad, actually. He was.
What do you mean the African protest against Korean things?
I think that was.
That's this example right there before. Yeah, that was about the issue that was in Queens, where African Americans thought the banks were giving the Korean money to buy bonds, but the Koreans said no. We have this system where everybody brings money and we give to someone to buy and so that's an example of solidarity.
Good example.
Mexican, what?
It's a good example of that example.
A good example.
Also, because these people are immigrants, they cannot get jobs. The banks won't give them money. So how do they make sure they develop their own banking system? Okay, we have 100 people, everybody brings 1,000 at the end of the month. We're gonna give it to so and so.
Right.
We take turn. And so if I have 200,000, I can go and start a business, buy a house. I don't have to go to bank. A lot of immigrants groups do that to survive. And we can learn those things for ourselves. There must be accountability. It's not that I get my money, then I run. You have to be there. So,
Can I have a chance to share my just short thought? Obviously, this short segment of this session became a very eye-opening experience. And then I really appreciate the John and then Captain were willing to provide and then spend your time to being as a Korean American officer and immigrant. I always appreciated the Afro-American community as an individual and community because of your sacrificial, historical, actual what's happening in the part of American history. We as a Korean American immigrant actually have been beneficial. So I really, there's no doubt, because of your sacrificial sacrifice, then next, like a Chinese immigrant, Japanese immigrant, Korean immigrant, able to establish less harsh or less, difficult, conditions that you've been through in history. At the same time, when you talk about the future of the Salvation Ministry, your visual community participation as a member and then faithful believer is a very crucial and needed because the whole purpose of what I believe is that there's a reason God built the Salvation Army in certain time and certain divine purpose. When you think about other major churches like a Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, Catholic, Anglican, they have issued that they've been more liberal or they just interested about holding the classism, high level of classism. Not many church or denominations purely interested to reach out the poor and uneducated community. We, Salvation Army, still has such a pure, honorable desire, intention to reach. So I think that we had a great commitment and the purpose that but when you talk about the holiness, sometimes we so limited the true meaning of holiness. It's not only personal aspect. The holiness is a social aspect too, the communal aspect. So you as God's representative, right? Everyone is a God's agent for healing and transforming community. When you talk about the message of holiness, we're not just focused on personal aspect. We need to continually challenge people to bring the aspect, social and communal aspect of holiness. But when you go into that issue, I think we need to honestly look at and open ourselves. Change is cost. If you want to change something, if you want to transform something, we need to willing to, not just talking, but we need to willing to put ourselves in the long journey of the whole process of changing, which we talk about cost and commitment. But it's center between cost and commitment. It should be Christ must be center, right? But you as Afro-American descendant, the body of Salvation Army is so valuable and precious. But we need to continue to grow our community. That really energize the future of Salvation Army. Yeah, and then I feel like I'm never like confession. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts. So I guess to kind of wrap up a lot of the ideas that we were having, what we heard a lot of was this idea of removing this stigma of the fear of other people getting ahead. We need to get rid of these ideas that each other are our enemy and understand that see each other as our teammates, not as our enemies, and working as a community. And maybe I definitely appreciate your thoughts from your perspective because the Korean American voice is definitely one that has a lot of intersections within the history of African Americans in this country. You look at things like the LA race riots, and you look at things like, even at the broader Asian American community for Japanese internment, there's similarities that you can connect. off of the experience of living in this country and not being white. And there are things that we can learn from each other, things that we can work together with, things that we can work with people of all races, with white people, with Asian Americans, with African Americans, and come together and really learn from each other. But at the same time, it's very important for people, to step out of their community and come into another community and hear their voices and hear their perspectives. So I definitely appreciate your presence in this meeting and your perspective. I guess the last thing that I would definitely recommend is the sources where a lot of this information came from. There's a lot of really good, information in these couple of books. These aren't all of the best ones, but these are some of the ones that I love. The first one, Between the World and Me, was a bestseller last year. It's a really quick book that does an amazing job of expressing a lot of these issues in an almost poetic kind of way. Like, you read this book and you're like, wow, this is like so well said. And it talks about mass incarceration, what's going on in police brutality today. That's a great book to read. The New Jim Crow was written in 2010, and it's about the prison industrial complex, and it talks about how that works. That's a little bit of a bigger book by this really smart Stanford law professor, Michelle Alexander. More Than Just a Race talks about how we got to the inner city, and it talks about those policies that tracked African Americans in the inner city, which is another really good book to look at to really understand how the ghetto formed. Blue Chip Blacks is a book that talks about the black middle class in certain areas like Prince George's County and places where African Americans are thriving, and you have these middle class African Americans. And then this last one's actually a documentary. It came out a couple of weeks ago, 13th, which is amazing. It's on the 13th Amendment and about that loophole, and it's directed by the woman that wrote Selma. So this documentary is on Netflix, but you can probably figure out how to find it online for free. It does a really good job of explaining this historical trend from slavery and the 13th Amendment to what we see today. And if anything, like if I could only recommend some of the things in this list, I would definitely say read that first book and watch that documentary. Because it'll open your eyes to so much more. That's the last of this presentation. Thank you so much. We can close it right there. Could we what?
Leave that up there.
Yeah. No, this will be up there. You can go ahead and
Can I
grab it.
say one thing?
Yeah.
You showed a picture in the beginning, you had a picture up there of African children sitting in a circle, wondering. No, I haven't, and somebody gave it to me, and the story behind that was that a missionary went to their tribe and where they were, and said to the kids, I have this treasure chest full of food, and I'm going to put it at the top of the hill, and you guys race, and the first one to get to it can have it. It's full of food. Of course, they were hungry. They all grabbed hands, and they ran together.
Got there at the same time. We all got there at the same time.
Before we leave, could you please fill out the actual survey, and the whole thing is for, I'll be collecting it at the door, and before we leave, we'll ask that Brother Don lead us in a word of prayer, and then we pause, take the seal from that. As a matter of fact, and as we pray, grab somebody's hand next to you, amen, just to start that connection right now, amen. Because sometimes there can be a lot of disconnection, but start grab somebody's hand right now.
Let's go ahead with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity that you've blessed us with to come together and learn about ourselves and each other. We pray that you allow us to take these lessons and these messages that we learn and implement them back in our own communities, but in and through your love. And we pray that you allow us to teach and to use these things as a servant of God, and as you see best for us to use them. We pray that we spread this message and we talk to more and have more conversations on these issues. And we ask that you bless us through the rest of our day. In Jesus' name, amen.